Welcome to the first installment of the Alien Probe podcast. I'm your host, Doug, and I'm being joined by my producer, Robert.
Hi.
The Alien Probe podcast goes over everything paranormal, weird, Bigfoot, aliens, UFOs, whatever. I mean, it covers the entire weirdness world. Today we're going to be discussing where are the aliens? To start with, the aliens might be hiding in underground oceans on moons surrounding other planets. If they were, they wouldn't even be able to be seen, as I think they'd be deep underwater. We wouldn't know they were there. They wouldn't know we were here.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't be seeing them at all.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we're always looking for aliens that would have the same kind of internal systems that we have, breathing oxygen and, just basically inside working the same. So I like this theory because, it kind of promotes the idea that maybe we're looking in the wrong space and there's a huge amount of space that we're not even looking towards. Even in our own Earth, where there's so much unexplored areas in our oceans that they could be at and we wouldn't even know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Deep in the ocean.
Yeah.
They've got the spacecraft coming out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that going on. I know that even the Tic Tac F-16 footage caught, the spacecraft entering the water,
mm-hmm.
going presumably deep underwater and then escaping and going quickly.
I haven't had a lot of personal UFO experience, although I am a believer. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me is related to that. It was about 2012, and I lived right on the beach in Santa Monica in this apartment complex. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, me and my significant other at the time were woken up by this weird throbbing humming sound, and it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It was really loud, and I've never heard anything like it. It sounded like a sci-fi sound. And we actually went out on our balcony, and you could tell that the sound was coming from the ocean. And we sat out there, we recorded it, and none of the sound went on the actual recording.
Oh.
And then, it kind of just faded away after like an hour. We didn't see anything, but it was a really strange sound. But yeah, maybe that's related.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Yeah, I haven't had any other types of experiences with UFOs either. I've just decided to start the podcast because I have an interest, and I think there's something out there, but I really don't know, if there is. I mean, the closest thing I ever had was we lived up in the foothills of California, and we were outside, and we were actually watching some, meteors, a meteor shower, Leonid meteor shower.
Mm-hmm.
And out in the sky, it was far, and it looked like a triangular pattern of stars.
Mm-hmm.
And there was lights coming through the triangle. You couldn't see from behind the triangle, but the lights came through the triangle and out, and then proceeded across the sky. We couldn't, we didn't even, it was quite some time ago before the cell phone thing. So we really couldn't really do anything with it. So, it was quite unusual. The next thing is, are aliens imprisoned on super Earths? And super Earth's a gigantic Earth, and presumably it has 2.4 times greater than Earth's atmosphere. So we're thinking a spacecraft wouldn't even be able to achieve escape velocity.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the gravitational pull of the planet itself. I don't know why. I mean, we're taking this obviously out of an article, but I don't know how we would be able to make that determination. They couldn't do that pull. I mean, there is, they could have the technology to actually make that pull, but
I think that specific part of the article is kind of saying that We're not talking about super intelligent aliens. Maybe we are the most technologically advanced,
Yeah.
and there are other living species that would have to take an even harder technological jump to achieve the kind of technology needed to escape the atmosphere. But I mean, the universe is so old, and again, going back to we're always kind of baselining it against our own human experience. But life could have been born on other planets far earlier than it was on our own. So
Right.
It could be way more advanced just from the gift of being here longer. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, and this is all kind of just shooting in the dark, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting theory. I mean, the next one is we're looking for robots. Maybe they are not even physical, and we say human. Maybe it's, and one of my theories is that the spacecraft that are coming in that we allegedly, or see, not allegedly see, but the things we see, are operated by androids, as it were, and they're studying us from afar because they can't, like us, they would get old and die by the time they got here. So they send out these probes, kind of like we do. We've got the naked guy, and we've got the record, and all the Led Zeppelin and whatever we put on there.
Yeah.
Or
it was designed by Carl Jung, right? The image, if I'm remembering.
Yes, it was. And so I think maybe they're sending, maybe this is their version, maybe they're, not to say that, I mean, where that's kind of getting off track. I mean, maybe they were sent by something humanoid.
Yeah.
But it also could have been sent by something that was not humanoid, and then these are just probes.
Yeah.
If they're, not human, I don't know if they're really concerned about taking over our planet.
Yeah.
Now that's always a science fiction thing. Yeah, they're coming in, they're taking over.
Right.
And we're all going to get wiped out. How many, from the beginning, Earth versus the flying saucers, they come in and, they're wiping us out. All these, these things weren't even human, they were just a bunch of robots.
Yeah. And again, going back to, we're constantly comparing it to ourselves, because we're so warlike and we're so, manifest, built on the concept of like manifest destiny. So, we're assuming that the extraterrestrials would be the same when in fact they could be totally, peaceful and just interested in, scientific analysis, or maybe they created us, who knows. But I think it makes a lot more sense if you have a high degree of technology and you can communicate with these ships from far away, much like the internet and Wi-Fi.
Right.
Why would they send live beings in the ships? Why wouldn't they just remote pilot them, especially if the travel took a long time?
Yeah, be a kind of a boring trip.
Yeah, and you would have to like invent all sorts of like stasis and stuff. If you had the ability to just do like can communicate with the ship from like a huge distance, then why not just send the ship?
Yeah, that's also an interesting concept. The next one's we've already found the aliens, but are too distracted to realize it. This one was an interesting one. I didn't really understand the concept, but the aliens wouldn't look anything like us. Is kind of what it says. Thanks to pop culture, aliens probably make you envision a spooky humanoid with a big bald head. I don't know. This one was kind of an odd segment of the article, but. I don't know what they were really trying to get at.
Well, I mean, you never know. Different animals or, species on Earth, based on our limited understanding, we may think that they're part of our ecosystem. But instead, they could be some alien life form. Going back to that Rick and Morty episode where the squirrels were actually some interdimensional alien race that's sitting here to kind of just monitor us. And we just couldn't even pick up on, how they actually communicated.
I hope
Could
not.
Be similar to that.
My backyard's filled with them. Screwed. And then Bigfoot. I mean, there's the theory that Bigfoot's an alien. I mean, we haven't found a dead Bigfoot yet.
Yeah.
You know, and how are they hiding their, you know, I mean, that's a whole nother segment.
Yeah.
But, you know, that there's a theory that Bigfoots are actually aliens, you know, that are just here, you know. The next one, humans will kill all the aliens or already have. You know, we've probably by accident almost, maybe with, you know, maybe insecticides, maybe they were here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be our size, obviously. They
Mm-hmm.
could be like ants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they could look like anything. You
Right.
know, and maybe by accident we've destroyed them and we didn't even really know. You know, so that's kind of an interesting concept in itself. You know, are they, you know, were they something and we already did them in?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like the War of the Worlds. You know, we're just the mere fact that we were there. You know, that, you know, the virus destroyed them. You know, the COVID of the 50s, I guess you'd say.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Next one, the aliens triggered climate change and died. Well, on this one, you know, they were here, presumably before us, and they came in and, you know, developed a civilization. And I know, are you familiar with the deal where, you know, how many civilizations have been here before us? How many times has this happened? I mean, we've got this civilization. I've heard somewhere four times. I don't know how they'd even know.
Yeah.
But, you know, and back to the, you know, the destruction of civilization on Earth. I mean, it dies, it gets, I saw this one deal on Discovery where what happens after all civilization dies and what happens to all the buildings, and it just shows that they just literally evaporate into the soil and you kind of start over.
Yeah.
You know, we may not ever have any.
Right.
We see these small artifacts that we pull out of the ground, and, you know, that's allegedly part of some, like there's the first computer, you know, and it was this, you know, rusted old thing, and that they pulled out of the ground. It was rather fascinating that they even came up with that.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to are what are commonly known in the UFO community as UPAs, or out-of-place artifacts. They basically don't seem to fit in with that time in history's level of technological advancement. And you know, there are quite a few of these. The Baghdad Battery is one of them, and then I think there was some sort of computer found in ancient Egypt. It is interesting, particularly in Egypt, and going back to what we watched last night, Stargate, that more and more actual evidence is pointing to the civilization of Egypt being far older than we initially have estimated. But contemporary scientists still are hesitant to actually admit this. I think, who is it, Robert Schoch, has actually gone forward, and he's like a geologist, a famous geologist, and has provided ample amounts of evidence based on his testing of the Sphinx and the erosion patterns that appear on the Sphinx, that it actually is far older than what we initially thought. And some people point to the fact that the head may have been something different, like a lion head, and then it was recarved into a pharaoh's head later on, that there's different erosion patterns in both pieces of the Sphinx, which I think is particularly fascinating.
Yeah, and what is it? They think it's 5,000 years old, and then 10,000 years old. They really haven't.
Yeah.
You know.
And it could be that it was a huge civilization whose kind of materials just didn't stick around as much as something like the Sphinx did. But if a lot of their tools and stuff were easily biodegradable, you know, you could assume why you wouldn't have a lot more evidence to support that theory.
Interesting, yeah. The next one, dark energy is splitting us apart. Well, that's like the weirdest one. You know, I don't know if dark energy is really splitting us apart, or if, I don't know how that's going to make the aliens, how that has an effect on whatever alien there is.
Yeah, I'm not big on physics or matter or anything like that. My brain can't handle it, so I'm not really sure I can wrap my head around that particular theory.
Well, let's kind of go into where are the UFOs? Are there UFOs?
Mm-hmm.
You and I both are big into the Bob Lazar and Joe Rogan interview, which kind of, I'll listen to that. I've got riding along with friends of mine, and I put it on, and I'll fire it up, because even people that really weren't big into UFOs, all of a sudden were like, "Holy crap, this is for real. This is real." And Bob Lazar was able to keep his facts straight throughout all these years, since the 80s, 20 years, and not deviating one bit from what he experienced at S4, which is a faction of Area 51 down there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, different UFOs. He found 4 or 5 different UFOs. One was actually allegedly dug up, and it had been underneath the soil, kind of like just, they were digging for something probably in the Western days, and all of a sudden they found this UFO, and it made its way to S4 for evaluation. But what do you think?
Well, I mean, I've been interested in UFOs and conspiracies and the paranormal for a few decades now. What initially got me into it was I was huge into comic books when I was younger, and I kind of gravitated more towards graphic novels as I got into my 20s. And this publishing company called Paradox Press put out these series of large graphic novels called The Big Book Of. And 2 of the topics that they covered were conspiracies and the unexplained. And in the unexplained novel, or graphic novel, they covered extensively the Bob Lazar story. And I was immediately fascinated with it, particularly in the areas where it seemed like the government was really trying to suppress what he was trying to put out there. A lot of people still don't know that Bob Lazar initially came forward as he didn't want to be identified. He was anonymous. And then he started experiencing a lot of harassment, and he was so scared for his life that he finally came out and revealed his identity because he was afraid the government was going to kill him, or so he says.
Yeah.
So I've been really interested in the story, and not a lot of people I knew had heard of Bob Lazar. So when Bob Lazar went on Joe Rogan, I was really excited to hear like a more long-form version of the events that he described. There is some people, including himself, that acknowledge that the thing that he experienced may have been a government experiment in and of itself, that the government manufactured these things for him to look at just to get his reaction, he was part of a larger experiment to see how humans would react in general to creatures from another world. So who knows, really?
Yeah, I mean, he said, he saw, I don't know if he saw did he see the creatures?
Yeah, he saw 2 scientists and the back of a creature. He said he walked by one day and the door was open, and then he said, I think that might have been a test.
Yeah, well, this thing kind of, reared its ugly head to start with, that, obviously not Area 51, but in 1945, the Roswell incident, that kind of started out the whole UFO phenomenon, it seems. And
Yeah.
Was that a weather balloon? Was it?
It's really ridiculous. I mean, the person, it was like a high-ranking military official that reported it, and the first day, right? And that's when the initial papers went out and said we have a flying saucer, and then they changed the story the next day, from what I remember. So I don't see why a high-ranking military official who, if the case is true, probably wasn't in the loop, and then got scolded afterwards to change their story. I think that makes a lot more sense.
Well, that kind of kicked off the whole UFO phenomenon. I mean, and then I don't think people really started looking to the sky, and then all of a sudden, wow, this is, I'm starting to see things, there's, is there something out there, and then you get, the abduction, You know, there's a lot of weirdness out there. Are these people really being abducted, or do they have psychological problems? We don't really know.
Probably a little bit of both.
You know,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of both. It's
Yeah.
frightening. And then cattle mutilations. What's the what's the purpose? I've seen even recently, you know, this cattle mutilation thing where it's perfectly like a laser cut out, you know, portions of the, you know, the cattle, the uterus and
Mhm.
part of the jaw, and you know what could be the, you know, I just can't picture why, you know, unless something, you know, unless aliens are trying to figure, unless things are evolving here on Earth,
Mhm.
and that somehow is an indicator of what's happening on the planet. You know, they come in, they do cattle mutilations in the 50s, 60s, 70s. You know, how are we progressing? I mean,
Yeah.
It could be something that we aren't even aware of, you know, that our understanding of anatomy, we're not even able to measure what they're actually looking at, or it could just be sickos. You know,
Yeah.
you look at Jack the Ripper in London. This was a very similar kind of style to the murders that he was doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe there's sickos out there that don't want to necessarily kill people, but maybe they kill cattle and they slice them up. I have no idea. You know, I think that there are, maybe it's a mixture of both. Maybe it's one, maybe it's the other. I think that there's probably, I think it's already been proven that there at least has been copycats for crop circles.
Yeah.
So I could see why there would be copycats for cattle mutilation. Every time that there's interest in something, the news comes, more people come, more tourists come. God knows, you know, Roswell has benefited greatly from, you know, the interest.
The Mecca.
Yeah. So there could be something said. There's definitely historical precedent. I know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was a whole group of people somewhere in America, I'm pretty sure, that created a similar style of sea monster to Nessie, and they kept it going for years and got a festival going in the lake. So, you know, who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. And the crop circle thing is, you know, I saw the guys out there with the wood strapped to their feet, and you know, but if you look at that, if you look at that, there's no way that, you know, that those designs could be made as you fly over. And I know you've seen them also, and there's no way that could be made by a guy with a piece of wood on a string, you know, stuck to a stick in the middle, making a circle, and I mean, these things are intricate patterns, and in some cases, almost three-dimensional patterns.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
But what would be the point, you think?
Well, that's the same thing as the Yucatan Peninsula, where they have the gigantic. It's almost like a giant airstrip on top of these mesas down there that when you fly over it in an aircraft, there's no way these could have been made so intricately and straight. And then, you know, the pictures of these birds and just all of these, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And you know, the same thing. Those couldn't have been made by just somebody on the ground, you know, without being able to be seen from above.
I mean, I definitely think that they could have been made on the ground. However, I think that without a purpose, without there being things higher, why would they? Because nobody could appreciate what was being made. It could have been a tribute to the gods, you know? I have no idea. I'm kind of up in the air on the ancient astronaut theory. On one hand, I think at its core, it makes a lot of sense, but then with like ancient aliens, you can only go so far, and they're still going to seasons and seasons. So now I feel like they're just grabbing anything and, you know, everything.
Well, they've got. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've seen every. I'm watching Ancient Aliens because it's still coming out with new episodes, but they're just regurgitating.
Well,
it gets a little ridiculous sometimes. Like, was George Washington in communication with the aliens?
You know,
like, what the hell is going on?
Well, so everyone kind of gravitated toward that. You know, the military is now back to the Tic Tac UFO fighter pilot image.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're saying that the government's starting to loosen up because there's so much to be seen out there with the military, and they don't want to report it because they'll pull their flight status.
Right.
Now it's like, well, we're losing. We don't want them to not release that information. We want to see what it is. We want to take it and we want to study it.
Right.
And see where these things are coming. What is their intention?
Well, I think definitely, especially in the last 10 years and the proliferation of, essentially TV studios in everybody's pockets,
Exactly.
I think the government realizes there's only so much they can keep a lid on.
Yeah.
And it would be ridiculous to kind of just disavow anything at this point because so much is coming in now that it serves their interest better to acknowledge the fact that maybe there is something else. We don't know what it is. They're still like, oh, well, maybe it's Russia. That's really why we want to release this, because it might be new technology from another country. I highly doubt that another country would have that level of technology with the kind of acceleration and stuff that you're seeing in those videos, and they wouldn't have just bombed us to hell already.
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely an understanding that there is something else, but it could be that what the government is telling us is the truth, that they have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And speaking of the technology, let's just go off that. I'd like to, each time we put out one of these, discuss something of, recent developments, like the jetpack guy down at LAX. Has there been anything new? I know there's 2 sightings.
As far as I know, there's been 2 separate sightings by, pilots, these commercial airlines reporting it. I think it's fascinating. It's most likely a person. Hawthorne is where SpaceX is held, and it's right next to LAX. So who knows there? But these pilots are reporting a rocket man in the sky as they're, I think, landing.
Yeah.
And it definitely is higher. It could just be a drone with a mannequin attached to it.
Yeah.
You never know. But it's interesting, that's for sure. It could just be Elon Musk fucking with people.
Yeah, no doubt. Put the Tesla into space and,
Yeah.
What's next? Okay, well, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Alien Probe Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can catch us on Facebook at the Alien Probe Podcast, Twitter at the Alien Probe Podcast is it Alien Probe Pod?
Alien Probe Pod, yes.
Okay, and definitely email comments or suggestions at alienprobepodcast@gmail.com. And thank you very much for listening.